The servant holding the candle later said that he first smelled something like burnt fat and rotten meat when the Empress was still speaking clearly. This was 6 days before she was taken away from even her closest relatives. He spoke quietly, averting his gaze as if even the memory of those chambers left a taste of iron on his tongue. Later, in one of the late proto-secretary's notes, it was written, "The patient no longer gets up. Her hands are covered with spots, her body is becoming increasingly rigid, and her secretions are unpleasant. Prayers are of no avail." Elsewhere, her breath reeks of tar and carrion. Sometimes she calls for a child who, it is said, has long since passed away. Empress Theodora III was the last of the Palaiologos dynasty, widowed at an early age and taking over the reign during her son's illness. She was 46 years old, 22 of which she spent in power, faced with threats from the Serbs, the Hungarians, and, even worse, the internal nobility. She stopped leaving the palace in the last years of her life. The first rumors of her illness appeared after Easter. At that time, she still appeared on the balconies, but her gaze had become cloudy, her face haughty and frozen, and, as people later recalled, her neck was wrapped in a scarf, as if to hide an ulcer. Servants noticed strange changes. There was a strong smell of vinegar and resin in her room, and she was brought warm animal blood every day to strengthen her, according to the report of the guard Bartholomew, who changed the guard at the outer doors. In the last days of April, only monks and a doctor carrying a box of needles and jars of black potion left the chambers. Once during the night, I heard a scream, a woman's. At first angry, then like a child's. The doctor, an elderly man named Anastasius, adhered to a practice of mixed healing, bloodletting in the morning, opium at night, warm compresses with honey and foul-smelling ointments containing wine, frog, liver, and dog fat. From the description found in his notebook, the abscess in the groin was opened, and a foul-smelling substance came out. The skin is peeling off in layers. The face is unrecognizable. Prayers are being read, but she turns away. Sometimes she laughs, sometimes she calls for her son. Her son, Prince Alexei, had been found dead 3 years earlier. The official version was illness, but the senior maid testified under oath that she had seen the Empress herself leaving his chambers at night, holding a blood-stained blanket in her hands. These rumors were suppressed by executing 3 witnesses for slander against the Anointed One. The child's body was not displayed, and the funeral took place at night without the public. Later, under the new regime, one of the archive officials discovered a record. The boy's bones were not in a coffin, but in a prayer room. The skull was wrapped in embroidered fabric that had belonged to her baby clothes. There was a mark from teeth on her neck. This record was burned, but a copy remained in the private collection of the monastery of Saint Irene. In May, Theodora's condition worsened. She stopped speaking, only whispering, repeating the names of saints, and cursing someone named Stephen. That was the name of the archbishop who had spoken out in favor of transferring power to her nephew, the young and fanatically devout Agatho. The court was plunged into fear. Some feared for their lives, others for their souls. Servants began to flee. The rooms were covered with dust and stench. The birds kept in the inner garden died. Some claimed to have seen blackbirds circling above the chambers, which could not be driven away. The doctor wrote, "The organs are failing, the urine is dark, the tongue is blackened, the nails are falling off, the skin is blistering. She is not responding to potions. We tried to light incense, but the stench is even stronger. The Empress was locked in her bedchamber behind 2 doors. Only 2 monks, a doctor, and a eunuch appointed to guard her from external and internal evil were allowed to enter. The eunuch disappeared. His body was later found in a water cistern. During that period, the political situation became extremely tense. Rumors spread throughout the palace that Theodora had died, but her body was being hidden until a decision was made on her successor. Agatho, surrounded by monks and soldiers, declared himself God's representative, causing outrage among the old nobility who remained loyal to the Palaiologos family. From a report by the Byzantine ambassador to Serbia, in the palace there is plague, fear, and prayer. Power is draining away through the cracks like pus from a body. No one knows if she is alive, but everyone feels that the end is near. On the evening of May 26th, amid complete silence in the palace, 2 heavy urns containing burnt fabrics and food remains were carried out of the Empress's chambers. Servants who witnessed the event said that among the charred remains were fragments that did not resemble everyday objects, scraps of children's clothing, hair, and blankets, with dried stains that remained dark even after burning. According to a monk who supervised the ceremony, when the fire caught the fabric, the smell was not carnal, but like a burnt tooth. That same night, the doctor Anastasius disappeared. His body was found 3 days later, hanging by the neck in the inner courtyard, with a bag of herbs stuffed in his mouth. It was announced that he had ended his life out of shame before God. However, a later report from a guard stated there were handprints on his neck. The rope was hanging too high. Someone was holding him while he was dying. By that time, Theodora had not spoken a word. Even her personal confessor had abandoned her. The last entries in the monastery register read, "Her eyes are rolled back, her teeth are bared as if in a sneer. Her skin is like parchment. Her body emits a stench that is unbearable even for those accustomed to decay. Access to the chambers was completely restricted. The eunuchs were replaced by monks. The doors were nailed shut from the inside and sealed with wax bearing the Palaiologos coat of arms. Food was passed through a crack in the door. None of those who delivered the trays returned a second time. They asked to be transferred or remain silent until the end of their lives." According to the later treatise on the deaths of the anointed, compiled by the physician Sava of Crete at the court of Agathis, Theodora, deprived of God's grace, experienced putrefaction while still alive. We have reason to believe that her insides began to decay 3 weeks before her physical death. Bile entered her blood, causing her eyes to turn yellow and her skin to become covered with spots like those of the dead. Servants noted that fluid was dripping from her ears. In some cases, this is a sign of brain decay. The smell spread throughout the southern wing of the palace. Ambassadors arriving from Serbia, Bulgaria, and the Holy See refused to enter the halls near her chambers. Then Agatho began to act. Under the protection of armed monks, he convened a council, at which he read a letter supposedly written by the Empress herself. "I entrust power to my nephew, for my flesh is weak, and my spirit desires rest." The signature was forged. The seal was removed from one of the old papers by deceiving the librarian. One of the council members, Archon Manuel, a veteran of previous wars, stood up and said, "If she is still alive, let her come out." He was dragged out and hanged on the same day for inciting rebellion. In early June, towards evening, the courtyard was filled with the sound of bells ringing. The people decided that the Empress had died, but a monk who came down from the tower reported, "She is alive, but there is nothing human left in her." Nevertheless, 3 days later, the doors were broken down. Inside, she was found motionless on her bed, in a blood-stained shirt. Her body was blackened, her face was disfigured, one eye was missing, and the other was open, as if watching. A child's doll lay on her chest. Next to her was a leather note with scribbles, which were later recognized as the words, "He is still crying." According to the patriarch's report, the body was rotten with flesh falling off the bones. The hands were bent like a child's in the womb. The groin was cut open. The skin was peeling off in layers. An attempt at ritual cleansing failed. The incense could not mask the smell. On the second day, the monks began to vomit. On the third day, they fell silent. During embalming, the internal organs were found to be partially destroyed. Some organs were missing. The brain was in the form of a dark mush. The bile ducts were filled with coagulated blood. The lungs were stuck together. The liver was hardened and infested with worms. The rib cage was open. According to the description of a servant, everything was like those who have been dead for more than a week. The empress was secretly buried near the walls of the monastery without a liturgy. No tombstone was erected. The next day, Agathon ordered that all the furnishings of her chambers be replaced and the palace renamed. A rumor spread among the people. Theodora will return. She is not dead. She is asleep. Would you like to continue? In the next part, the struggle for power, the rebellion of the nobility, and the collapse of order after her death. A week after the funeral, Theodora's body reappeared in the Chronicles, not as a deceased person, but as an omen. In Pera, in the port of Constantinople, a wine merchant claimed to have seen a woman in a black robe with a burnt face pass by his shop and whisper, "He is still crying." The same words were found on the inner wall of the palace chapel, scratched into the stone with fingernails. One of the servants claimed that the inscription appeared suddenly, and that the candles on the altar went out by themselves. But beyond the realm of mysticism, things were happening that were much more tangible. Agathon's power, formally confirmed by a letter and supported by part of the monastic community, caused alarm in the army and among the city's nobility. His fanaticism, his attempts to purge the city of defiled dissenters, and the closure of 3 old rite churches caused outrage. Archon Terentius, the son-in-law of one of the former ministers, gathered 500 guards and blocked the western entrance to the palace. He demanded that the body be made public and that an open funeral be held. In response, Agatha ordered his family to be arrested. The children were sent to a monastery. His wife was sent to prison, from which she never emerged. Meanwhile, executions began in the palace dungeons. Those who had seen the empress's body were arrested and forced to renounce their words about the living dead body. The executioners worked in silence. First the fingers were cut off, then the tongue, then the eyes. The list of the repentant from the monastery of St. Thomas preserves the names of 46 people who died within 3 days. The city was filled with fear. The Chronicles mentioned that singers fell silent in the markets and taverns closed. People spoke in whispers, and no one went out at night. And when the wind blew from the south, the residents of the neighborhoods adjacent to the former chambers of the empress smelled a stench that could not be masked by sandalwood or tar. Meanwhile, the conspiracy grew stronger. The old nobility, families who had lost their influence under Theodora but had not forgotten their humiliation, it began to take action. Archon Valerius, an elderly but respected merchant, formed an alliance with the fleet commander Andronicos. Letters with seals were sent to Thessaloniki, Trebizond, and even Rome, proposing that a new ruler be recognized in exchange for trade and church concessions. The documents spoke of Theodora's madness and unclean death, of the falsification of the succession, and of the rotten body that rules through its nephew. Agatho, sensing an impending mutiny, ordered the empress's coffin to be opened and her body burned. This happened at night, in the garden where she had been secretly buried. Witnesses recalled that the smoke was thick, black, and stuck to the skin. Some soldiers vomited. One lost consciousness. The remains were thrown into a pit and covered with oil. The priest who blessed the fire fled a day later with a nun and drowned in the Bosphorus, but it was to no avail. On the 3rd day after the cremation, Valerius's guards stormed the palace. The battle was brief. The monks defending Agathos did not have time to resist. The nephew was captured. An executioner named Nicephor later recalled, "He did not cry, he prayed, until he saw the nails." He was nailed to a board and displayed at the western gate. By order of the nobility, Agathos' body was not buried. He was burned in the same furnace where the empress had been burned. His ashes were mixed together and scattered over the sea. The new ruler, Archon Valerius, did not accept the title of emperor. He convened a popular assembly and promised to restore order and moderation in the church. But within a month, new riots broke out. Superstition took root. Rumors did not disappear. People claimed to have seen a woman in a burnt robe in cemeteries. Near the palace walls and in the markets, children said they heard crying. Monks did not go to sleep with their eyes open. In the chambers where Theodora had lived, footsteps could be heard. One chronicler concluded, the death of the body did not end the decay of power. Its shadow, rotting, lifeless, but tenacious, is still present. Would you like to read the fourth and final part? It contains the end of the legend, Europe's reaction, and the schism in the church. 40 days after the burning of Theodora's remains and the execution of Agathos, an embassy from Venice arrived in Constantinople. The delegation was headed by the elderly Cardinal Mario Mazzini, who had been authorized by the Pope to establish ecclesiastical peace and investigate rumors of the Empress's unclean death. The accompanying documents, marked "not to be read," outside the Curia, contained a report on alarming letters received from merchants and clergy. Reports of hallucinations, illnesses among monks, and outbursts of rage among children born by candlelight. The cardinal was met without pomp. The court was empty. Valerius stepped aside from power, citing ill health. Actual power lay with a council of nobles, who were themselves afraid to utter Theodora's name. Mazzini questioned servants, reviewed records, and visited the burned site. In a letter to the Pope, he wrote, "The smell can still be smelled near the former chambers. The walls have turned black. Some say that blood is seeping from the stone." Upon opening the archives, a discrepancy in dates was discovered. The body appears to have been dead before the transfer of power. The signature on the document is clearly not hers. It was a usurpation, sanctified by lies and fear. Life outside the palace walls did not return to normal. Servants continued to disappear. The nuns from the convent of St. Hidets. Irene submitted a request to be relocated. At night, someone rang the bells, and a child's voice could be heard in the corridors. In the hospital at St. Paul's Church, more than 24 suicides were reported among patients with fever. Before their deaths, they all raved about a woman with a torn-out eye. When part of the mosaic depicting the Virgin Mary fell off the walls of St. Sophia's Cathedral, the people took it as a sign. One of the priests announced, "Theodora has not been forgiven. She will return until the truth about her death is revealed." 2 days later, he was found dead in a well with his hands tied. Cardinal Mazzini, unable to obtain direct testimony, attempted to perform an exorcism. The ceremony was interrupted when the monk holding the cross fled in panic, claiming that he had seen a shadow on the wall lean toward him and whisper, "He is still crying." Mazzini left the city in a hurry. In his report to the Pope, he suggested temporarily excommunicating the Church of Constantinople from the Roman Communion, not as a punishment, but as medical isolation. Meanwhile, madness was growing in the streets of the capital. There was a massacre in a butcher's shop. Babies were killed out of fear that they were carriers of the curse, and there were mass arson attacks. The city was divided. Some demanded that Theodora's name be restored and that she be canonized, while others demanded that all traces of her be completely destroyed. A civil war broke out. Rumors spread throughout Rome, Venice, and Trebizond, the city that devoured its mother, the stinking kingdom, the faceless empire. New names were drawn on maps: the rotting shore, the land of the damned. The remnants of his family were exiled. Some were hanged. The name Palaiologos was erased from the records. However, even years later, in the palace, which had been turned into an archive, no one sat on the throne in the southern hall. It was covered with cloth. Servants avoided it. At night, footsteps could still be heard in the corridors. In the chambers where Theodora had died, the candles went out by themselves. The monastery Chronicles, compiled a generation later, said, "The death of the Empress did not bring peace, for her flesh died before her spirit, and as long as that spirit wanders, power will rot from within. The country has become a corpse, unaware that it is already dead." This is where the story ends. The body of a woman eating her child may be a myth, but the fear she left behind was real. And even today, there are those in Constantinople who do not call her by name, only she.